All right, so today we're going deep on anxiety, but not in the way you might think.
Hmm. In what way, then?
Not like the typical how to get rid of it stuff, but more like, is it really the enemy we think it is, you know?
I'm intrigued already.
We'll be looking at Sarah Wilson's book, First, We Make the Beast Beautiful, and an essay by Jaime Hoerricks.
Oh,
They both kind of suggest that anxiety is like a fundamental part of being human, not
okay,
some glitch.
not something to be fixed.
Right, more like something to understand. And
So-
maybe even,
Embrace.
embrace it.
Wow.
And Hoerricks brings this really interesting angle. They're an autistic gestalt processor.
Gestalt processor.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I have, but I'm not sure how it connects to anxiety.
Okay, so Wilson's book really dives into this idea that anxiety is not like a malfunction, but more like a feature. It's like deeply ingrained.
Hmm.
And she pulls from all sorts of sources. Buddhism, Stoicism, even modern psychiatry.
So she's really going broad with this, huh?
Yeah. But this is what I found fascinating. Wilson argues that anxiety could actually be a sign that someone is really engaged with the world.
Engaged.
Yeah, like a heightened sensitivity.
What?
Almost like a superpower that we could learn to use.
Okay, now that is interesting.
It's like a total flip of the script, right?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling ashamed of anxiety,
Which so many people do.
we could maybe see it as the sign of our ability to connect deeply, feel things intensely.
And maybe even create.
Exactly.
So if it's not the enemy, how do we learn to work with it?
That's where Hoerricks comes in. Being a gestalt processor means their brain processes information in wholes, not in sequences.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow.
So, like,
I mean,
imagine trying to solve a puzzle, but you're looking at the whole picture at once.
not just piece by piece.
Right. It's like their brain's constantly searching for these complete scripts, frameworks to make sense of everything.
And when those aren't there,
Anxiety kicks in.
makes sense.
Like their brain is racing,
Yeah.
trying to generate every possible scenario.
Whoa, that's got to be exhausting.
It is. It's like constantly running complex simulations in your head.
I could see how that would lead to anxiety.
Hoerricks actually compares their brain to a large language model.
An LLM.
Yeah, which needs a ton of energy to predict and generate text.
I see the analogy.
And just like LLMs generate heat,
Ah,
this constant processing leads to exhaustion, burnout.
yep, that makes sense.
And it really shows you that different minds experience and cope with anxiety in vastly different ways.
For sure. And traditional systems like standardized tests
Hmm.
or even just the typical classroom, they're not really designed for brains that work like that.
Exactly. And Hoerricks talks about this, the immense cognitive cost of trying to fit into a system that isn't built for how they think.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And they've seen this firsthand with their students too,
Yeah.
especially the ones who are also gestalt processors.
So instead of feeling supported,
Hmm.
they feel pressured to adapt
And like they're broken.
when they're not.
Right. Now this next part is wild. Hoerricks gets these intense nocturnal panic attacks where their brain basically runs a full-on crisis simulation while they're asleep, and they wake up feeling like it's happening for real.
Oh my gosh.
Heart racing,
Yeah,
disoriented.
that sounds terrifying.
It is. But here's the thing. After these episodes, they often have fully formed poems or pieces of writing. It's
Right.
like their brain worked through these deep anxieties
Using a panic attack.
and resolve them through this creative expression.
Wow. So their anxiety is actually fueling their creativity.
In a way, yeah, it kind of goes back to Wilson's idea of making the beast beautiful.
Instead of trying to get rid of it
They're transforming it, giving it a voice through writing.
and finding beauty in something that's usually seen as so negative.
Exactly.
So we're back and still thinking about anxiety with Sarah Wilson's book. First, We Make the Beast Beautiful, and Jaime Hoerricks' essay. And I have to say, I'm really struck by how both of them kind of challenge this idea of just trying to get rid of anxiety.
Yeah, it really is a different way of looking at it instead of constantly fighting it. Maybe it's more about exploring the possibility that it could actually be a part of who we are, a source of strength.
Even creativity.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful idea. And Hoerricks' experience with those nocturnal panic attacks
Yeah.
really brings this home, waking up feeling like they're in a crisis.
Yeah.
But then they end up with these fully formed poems or pieces of writing.
It's wild. Like their brain is processing these deep anxieties
Hmm.
and turning them into something beautiful, meaningful through creation. I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't wish those panic attacks on anyone, but the fact that they can lead to these bursts of creativity, it really says something about the power of the mind to transform even the most difficult things into something positive, you know? I'm not sure I completely agree. Wilson's idea of making the beast beautiful, though, it seems a bit simplistic.
Oh, that's good.
Some anxiety might be helpful, sure, but there have to be limits, right? That's a good point. I mean, not all anxiety is the same, and some forms can be really debilitating. I think what Wilson is getting at is maybe instead of always trying to suppress or erase our anxiety, we can learn to work with it, understand where it comes from.
And find ways to
channel that energy.
Right.
Okay, I can see that. It's about recognizing that anxiety in all its forms is part of what it means to be human. And maybe instead of always seeing it as the enemy, we can learn to see it as a teacher, a guide.
Yeah.
Maybe even a source of inspiration.
Exactly. And Hoerricks' story really shows how important it is to find what works for you.
As an individual.
Yeah, and their experience with.
Yeah.
Those traditional psychiatric systems really highlights that
for sure
they were critical of the way, those systems.
Which are often built on neurotypical assumptions can really miss the mark when it comes to understanding and supporting people who think and process information differently.
Right.
Like gestalt processors. And they weave through a decade of feeling misunderstood and misdiagnosed, which unfortunately is something a lot of people experience, especially those on the autism spectrum.
It's true. It really highlights the need for mental health care that's more flexible, more individualized, and more accepting of the different ways human brains can work.
Absolutely. Now, Hoerricks found a lot of solace and a way to make sense of their experiences through writing.
Writing.
Yeah. It started as technical writing, but it evolved into this way for them to process their anxiety, their unique way of thinking, and their experiences as an autistic person.
Like they found a language for the beast.
Yeah.
A way to translate all that complex data into something tangible.
Yeah.
Writing became a way to give form to their anxiety, to understand it, and to share it with the world.
And in doing so, they not only found a way to cope, but they also discovered their own voice and their creative potential.
It's amazing.
Like, sometimes our greatest challenges can lead us to our greatest strengths.
And it's interesting how Hoerricks' experience with hormone replacement therapy, HRT, seemed to have a big impact on their creative process, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like a catalyst. That unlocked a whole new level of clarity and fluency in their writing.
They described it as coming home to the English language, but from a different vantage point. Words and ideas flowed more easily, and writing, which had been a struggle, became a source of joy.
It makes you wonder how much of our creative potential is connected to our physical bodies and the hormonal shifts we go through.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I'm really curious to hear more about Wilson's strategies for working with anxiety. What kind of approaches does she suggest?
That's what we'll get into next. Stay with us as we keep uncovering these insights.
Welcome back to our deep dive on anxiety. It's been fascinating exploring these ideas. With Sarah Wilson's book, First, We Make the Beast Beautiful, and Jaime Hoerricks' personal essay.
They really offer a new way to think about anxiety, not as this thing to be scared of and try to eliminate,
but more about understanding it, maybe even harnessing it.
Yeah, and I think Hoerricks' experience as an autistic gestalt processor really illustrates that point.
Their brain is constantly searching for those complete scripts, those frameworks.
And it can be exhausting.
But it also fuels their creativity in such amazing ways.
Their experience with those nocturnal panic attacks is a great example.
Leading to fully formed poems and writings.
It's incredible how the mind can turn something so difficult into something beautiful and meaningful.
It really does challenge our usual ideas about anxiety.
But their story also points out the limitations of traditional psychiatric systems.
Right, how those systems often fail to understand and accommodate people who think differently.
Especially those who are neurodivergent.
Leading to misdiagnoses and treatments that don't really help.
And leave people feeling broken when they're not.
It really highlights a need for more awareness and acceptance of neurodiversity in mental health care.
Absolutely. So, moving on to Wilson's work, I'm curious about the specific strategies she suggests for working with anxiety.
Well, she doesn't offer any quick fixes.
Yes.
Or one-size-fits-all solutions. Instead, she focuses on understanding your own anxiety.
Okay.
Recognizing your triggers.
Okay.
And figuring out what works for you.
Makes sense.
One of the key ideas in her book is this concept of leaning into discomfort. Not always trying to avoid anxiety, but actually facing it head on.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like mindfully accepting anxiety.
Instead of resisting it.
Exactly. She argues that when we resist anxiety, we actually give it more power. But if we can acknowledge it Sit with it. Observe it without judgment.
You can start to understand it.
Right. And maybe even harness its energy.
So it's about changing our relationship with anxiety from one of fear and avoidance to one of curiosity and maybe even
collaboration.
Exactly. Another strategy Wilson talks about is connecting with our bodies. Anxiety often shows up physically, racing heart, shortness of breath, muscle tension.
Yeah.
And by paying attention to those physical sensations, we can learn to recognize the early signs of anxiety and do something about it before it gets out of control. Like tuning in to our body's wisdom.
Yeah.
What else does she suggest?
Finding meaning and purpose in life. She says when we feel disconnected from something bigger than ourselves, our anxiety can get worse, but when we have a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed each morning, it can help us navigate the tough times.
With more resilience.
Exactly.
So Wilson provides this framework for understanding and working with anxiety in a way that feels empowering.
And both Wilson and Hoerricks emphasize finding your own path, your own unique way to make the beast beautiful.
And Hoerricks' experience with hormone replacement therapy is such a great example of that.
How sometimes unexpected things can have a huge impact on our lives and our creative journeys.
They talked about how HRT made their writing feel more fluent, more clear.
As if language became more accessible.
It's amazing how connected our physical and mental selves are.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought from Hoerricks. They said, the beast does not have to be fought. It can be given form, given voice, given beauty in its own right.
Such a beautiful reminder. Their anxieties, even the parts we try to hide, can become sources of strength, creativity, and self-acceptance.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are resources and communities out there to support you. So embrace your beast, listen to it, and discover the beauty that lies within.